come to our concluding talk now, How Time Has Flown, and we are delighted to have in person Sister Timothy Prokes after her early illness. It is fantastic that she is resurrected and she is now with us in person. I have already introduced Sister Timothy, but because she is here in person, I'm going to introduce her again. Sister Timothy's concluding talk today will be on the dimension of sign. Sister Mary Timothy Prokes, a Franciscan sister of the Eucharist, is currently Professor of Theology at Notre Dame Graduate School of Christendom College. She is also a Professor of the Permanent Diaconate Program of the Diocese of Arlington in Virginia, and has taught in several colleges and universities in the US and Canada, frequently lecturing at conferences on the themes related to the theology of the body, bioethical issues, and the spiritual life. She has published several books, including Towards a Theology of the Body and Mutuality, the Human Image of Trinitarian Love, her most recent being At the Interface, Theology and Virtual Reality, in addition to several articles. Sister Timothy was one of 5 theologians in the Diocese of Saskatoon in Canada, invited by Bishop James P. Mahoney to read and critique one of the early drafts of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. She was also invited by the Commission on Theology of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops to serve as a resource to the bishops of the Western region on matters concerning sexuality. Sister Timothy Prokes will speak about Chapter 1 of Part 1 of Theology of the Body. My notes. Sister Timothy Prokes will speak on the dimension of sign, and we are delighted to have you here in person. Please welcome Sister Timothy Prokes.
Thank you so much, and it's a delight to be here. I want to ask right away, can you hear me in the back? Thank you. All right. And again, I tend to drop my voice sometimes, and so please let me know if you cannot hear. I want to thank, first of all, the privilege, and I mean that, of being invited to come to this conference, this symposium. And in a very special way, I thank for being able to speak in a position that would be taken by Dr. Wallstein. I think we cannot overestimate what we owe to him by way of his work in regard to theology of the body. And I'd ask you to offer with me this hour, this talk, for him and for his family. But what more apt day for reflecting on dimension of sign, the crowning of the theology of body, than the Feast of Corpus Christi, in which we receive its consummate realization in the body and blood of Christ, his perpetual spousal self-gift truly present under appearances of bread and wine. In this session of the symposium, we focus on audiences that he gave between January 5th, 1983, and July 4th of 1984. And over a year and a half had passed since the assassination attempt on his life in St. Peter's Square on the Feast of Our Lady of Fatima in 1981. How deeply John Paul understood and valued sign and symbol. It's not surprising that he wanted the bullet that had been retrieved from the assassination attempt placed in the crown of Our Lady's statue in Fatima as a way of thanking her, since he attributed the deflection of the bullet from his vital organs to her protection. In the ongoing development of theology of the body, in which the human body person is reflected upon in light of revealed truth, signs and symbols are crucial. And how important it is to remind ourselves of that when we know that revealed truths are frequently scorned or dismissed in our time as passé, irrelevant, in favor of what can be performed technically and or validated legally. So we have to begin by asking, why then in the church are sign and symbols so crucial for us as body persons? And the Catechism says, quote, "A sacramental celebration is woven of signs and symbols. In keeping with the divine pedagogy of salvation, their meaning is rooted in the work of creation and in human culture, specified by the events of the Old Covenant, and fully revealed in the person and work of Jesus Christ." So, right before addressing content from this series of audiences treating dimension of sign, it's necessary, I think, to make a couple of distinctions. A sign is a pointer, referring to a reality beyond itself, exceeding itself. And as we know, there are different kinds and levels of signs. There are spoken and printed words, gestures, or simply natural occurrences. Jesus told the multitudes, "When you see a cloud looming up in the west, you say at once, 'The rain is coming,' and so it does. And when the wind is from the south, you say, 'It will be hot,' and it is. Hypocrites, you know how to interpret the face of the earth and the sky. How is it you do not know how to interpret these times?" Recall John the Baptist, who had witnessed the Spirit descending as a dove on Jesus Christ at his baptism, and who, quote, standing with two of his disciples the next day, looked at Jesus as he walked and said, "Behold the Lamb of God." And John's disciples followed him. In that moment, John was a living sign, pointing beyond himself to a fuller reality. Signs, essential for us as human persons, provide direction and information. It can assist our comprehension and communication. And we know it can be hazardous not to know the meaning of a sign. And yet we know that signs can deceive, obfuscate, blur the truth. Liturgist Cipriano Vagaggini describes a sign as, quote, "a means or instrument that in some way substitutes for what is hidden or absent. While not perfect than what they signify, signs are perceptible to the senses, and so are more readily recognized and known than the deeper realities they signify." Vagaggini says, "The sign is like a veil, though transparent. For the eyes that do not know how to penetrate the veil, the sign is a screen. When the thing signified is immediately and therefore openly present to the cognitive power, the sign has no more reason for being. The value of the sign is limited wholly to the time during which the thing signified remains hidden," unquote. In John's Gospel, the 7 miracles of Jesus are called signs, with the miracle at the wedding feast of Cana designated as the first of his signs. Now, signs sometimes merge with lower levels of symbol, and symbols are more complex than mere signs and do not simply point to something beyond themselves. The term symboline originally meant thrown together, And for the ancient Greeks, to symbolize meant to bring together in wholeness what had been separated. And as already noted of signs, symbols also exist on varying levels. It's a general principle that the broader the range of possible meanings a symbol has, the greater its effectiveness. Now, the simplest are conventional symbols which depend upon common agreement for their meaning. Road signs, for example. On a higher level are those symbols which occur in nature, such as earth, air, fire, water. But on a higher level, we can say that the more powerful, the more universally understandable they are, that they are not confined to a certain culture or nation. And the more that a symbol bears the possibility of being both life-giving and death-dealing, the greater the symbol. Now, symbols of the highest level can be termed real symbols. They not only express outwardly a deeper unseen reality, but they contain the reality they symbolize. Karl Rahner said, "Every being necessarily expresses itself." And he carefully argued that the more a symbol truly contains and expresses what it symbolizes, the more perfect the symbol. In fact, said Rahner, Christian reality as a unity of reality and its symbols, quote, can only be presented adequately when the bodily reality of man, and so acts in dimensions of space and time, history and society, are conceived of as symbolic realities embodying his person and his primordial decisions. This would be the real starting point for reaching an understanding of the historically attainable life of the Church as symbolic embodiment of the Spirit of God and of the inner history of the dialogue between God's free love and human freedom, unquote. The soul is fully present in each part of our bodies. Again, Rahner said, quote, in every human expression, mimetic, phonetic, etc., the whole man is somehow present and expressing himself through the expressive form. It is not confined to one portion of the body. How important it is to realize that whatever is said or acted out involves the whole person. Peter Kreeft is helpful here when he graphically describes how Jesus Christ's body and blood are no mere sign. And I quote him, at the culmination of all divine revelation, we find God himself becoming a material being. The body that grew to manhood only by eating unleavened bread and slaughtered animal flesh in a carpenter's home in Nazareth, that blood really flowed down the cross and into the earth out of his broken heart. It's not a poetic metaphor. That real flesh and those wounds that were touched by doubting Thomas, that was and is God. He even ascended into heaven in this human body. He has it now and forever. He took matter up into his divine person, unquote. Now, it's not possible here today to probe in greater depth the meaning of the levels of sign and symbol, but it is necessary to appreciate basically how to distinguish them, and then to appreciate, as the Catechism says, their interwovenness in the sacraments, especially as we ponder theologically in union with Pope John Paul the meaning of body in sacramental marriage and celibacy. It may be helpful in seeing the distinction between sign and symbol to consider the gospel accounts of Easter and resurrection and what they mean to us in authentic faith. As Catholics, we do not believe in an empty tomb. The empty tomb was a sign for the women, Peter and John, on Easter morning. And there were other signs that accompanied it, from an earthquake and a huge stone visibly rolled back from the entrance to the tomb, to a head covering rolled up separately from a burial shroud. And the accounts tell of angels or young men in white who pointed beyond the burial place, saying, "He isn't here, he's risen. Go and tell his disciples." So we do not believe in an empty tomb, but in the risen Lord to whom the vacant tomb pointed. Jesus, in his transformed risen body, marked by his passion, living, effectively present, addressed Mary Magdalene by name and invited Thomas to touch his wounds. He prepared breakfast on the lake